Glad to have you back. Now, going by the plunge in oil prices globally recently, the pressure on the naira has increased since Nigeria produces less locally. Needless to say, increase in demand on the dollar since importers rely on American dollars to pay for goods bought abroad, causing depreciation on the local currency. TVC News correspondent Blessed Omonese gives us some details in this report.
According to Nigerian's foreign trade report, in 2019, Nigeria spent about 16.959 trillion naira, amounting to $47 billion on imports compared to 13.1 trillion naira, amounting to 36.5 billion naira in 2018. The report also revealed that the country spent about $28.7 billion on invincible services such as professional fees, financial services, business travel, medical tourism, amongst others. Although the disparity between the official rate and parallel market rate has narrowed to about 10%, the naira is still experiencing pressure from the strong dollar. Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, the value of the American dollar has reached record highs as many investors around the world are rushing to have a part of it. The International Monetary Fund says the American dollar is still the most popular currency, and as at the fourth quarter of 2019, it made up about 60% of all known central banks' foreign exchange reserves. In his view on the continuous fall of the naira, a former Central Bank of Nigerian Governor, Muhammadu Sanusi Lamido II, advised the Apex Bank to fund the bureau de change in the country to help the naira gain stability, adding that the BDC rate remained an exception. The former Emir of Kano also said the COVID-19 pandemic has left Nigeria in a difficult state that may have shocked the CBN. But a convergence of the CBN and NASFES will take care of 90% of the transactions in the market, which will lead to some small funding for BDC rate to bring back naira to the right level. It will be recalled that the Central Bank of Nigeria recently changed the exchange rate of naira to dollar at 397 naira from a previous 361 naira and 380 naira respectively in a bid to unify the exchange rates to stabilize the naira. With the global spread of COVID-19 pandemic, Nigeria economy is melting away from the fall in crude oil prices and the devaluation of the naira. A spike in consumer goods prices and a dent in government revenue could lead the country into an imminent economic recession.
Now, joining me via Skype to deliberate a little more on the recent happenings in the aviation space in Nigeria, I have Chukwu Erika Achum, an aviation analyst. Good to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me, David.
Now, before we make any estimates as to a recovery plan and a whole lot more, we have to first of all start off with the impact of the COVID-19. And going by the figures we have from IATA now, it says that about 124,000 jobs will be lost in Nigeria and also cost about $900 million, almost $1 trillion, to the GDP contribution. And taking a perspective look, a flashback to last week, we saw a whole lot of job cuts. Looking at the domestic airline operators in Nigeria, from your own lens, having interaction with a whole lot of airline operators and stakeholders, how much has the COVID-19 bitten into the aviation sector?
Well, those numbers from IATA are actually real. Again, you cannot overstate the fact that there is a disruption, and that disruption has come to stay. The industry has been hardly hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen balance sheets completely eroded. Aeroplanes are flying at sub-economic airlines are conducting sub-economic flights. So it is real. It is biting hard. My fear has always been that post the COVID-19 restart, these airlines would start to fly empty. So those numbers are real, and it is really, really pushing closer to home.
Now, let's also talk about recent happenings as well. We've seen international airlines as well. We've seen efforts locally as well. Before we open the international airspace, there's a demand now for COVID-19 negative status, which has to be presented at least 72 hours before boarding any flight. Now, if we're having this condition clearly stated and we still have challenges with our testing capacity, where does the onus lie, the airports or the airline operators, in having to conduct these COVID-19 tests, and also the validity of the tests?
Well, as part of the restart plans, the industry as a whole was very concerned about the infection management on board airplanes. And there was a concept that ICAO came up with. It is called the Public Health Corridor Concept. This Public Health Corridor Concept looks toward the entire work stream of an airline, trying to make sure that the entire touch points, looking at when the passenger checks in to when the passenger sits down on the aeroplane, the entire touch points are actually covered. And this process has been quite vital to managing the level of infections on board aeroplanes. From an airline perspective, it is very difficult for an airline to be able to ascertain the integrity of testing. Also, it is also very difficult to add to the work stream of an airline the testing for COVID-19. So the simple requirement of having the passenger provide a negative COVID-19 status was, of course, part of the requirements developed worldwide for many airlines who are operating internationally. Crews will have to be protected. Even the passenger sitting next to you will have to be protected. Unfortunately, this is another headache, but at this point in time, this is one of the barriers or mitigations that have been put in place in order to ensure, a safe or heat-free environment.
But would you say we are prepared to open our international airspace and have flights come in and go out on a commercial basis, trying to go back to the pre-COVID-19 levels, especially with this testing?
Well, the level of preparedness we've seen, especially coming from the regulatory point of view, has been quite impressive. I believe that the opening of the local segment of the travel economy was a way of testing or seeing if some of those procedures were actually or are actually performing according to design. So to say yes, right now we are prepared, of course, will be a little bit ahead of the regulators. But what we've seen from an industry point of view is that the regulators are working day and night, developing new procedures. You must also remember that, David, this pandemic has we have never experienced anything like this before. We are now seeing domesticated approaches. We are seeing homegrown approaches. Of course, these are also in line with international protocols. So yes, I would say a lot of effort is being made. We have seen that, but to say yes or no would, of course, be at the instance of regulators.
And talking about the stance of regulators as well, we've heard from the Minister of State for Aviation and other stakeholders within the industry looking at a timeline for reopening. Some are pushing for October 15th was the date that made the headlines, and others are saying, well, we should be cautiously optimistic about any reopening dates at this point in time. What's your thought on that as well?
Well, I believe the Minister has come out to clarify the October 15th date. What I believe happened was that there is a notice called a notice to airmen. That notice is actually repetitive every 90 days. And if you look at when it was published with exactly 90 days in mind. The minister has ever come up to say that prerogative of announcing a date will rest solely with the PTF.
Exactly.
And we might actually see dates being announced in weeks rather than months as or originally banded. So we are expectant, the whole economy is expectant from a user point of view, from an operator point of view, from a regulator point of view, because you have to remember that also the regulator has to make money. And everybody is pushing, but caution is the word.
Caution is the word. Now, at this point in time as well, where we're looking to fully reopen our domestic and international airspace. Now, government's consideration in terms of support, you look at advanced climes, we've had some level of bailout interventions and a whole lot more. Yes, the Nigerian government has taken some steps to reduce the impact of the COVID-19, but as operations are gearing up for a full takeoff. Let's look at tax relief now in terms of rebates on payrolls, the taxes as well. And then we also look at financial reliefs on airport and then air traffic control charges, ATC charges and taxes. What's your take on that as well in terms of reducing the pressure that these independent airline operators have to deal with?
Well, I believe the reliefs are good, tax relief, tax cuts, or whatever mode you decide you use in implementation. But what the industry has been crying for is actually money in the bank. Aviation is directly tied to your financial liquidity, and the airlines, through the body of the airline operators of Nigeria, have been pushing the government to make a financial commitment in order to bring back the industry to life. However, caution is also the word. We must remember that not too long ago, especially in 2019, the government of President Goodluck Jonathan gave 500 billion naira to the aviation industry. It is a little bit difficult to see how far that money went. Maybe because that was as an executive fiat, it wasn't really backed by an act of parliament. So it was very difficult to track operationalization. And this has to be really looked into before these monies are disbursed. There has to be a doctrine of accountability. We have to be able to track operationalization, and these funds have to be targeted at production rather than consumption. The airlines, in my opinion, will have to come up with simple business plans to show that these monies are going to be deployed in such a way that we can kickstart or restart the industry. We can't just accept the money and still operate the same way we were operating. So there must be a doctrine of accountability. Operationalization, targeting must be done, and I sincerely believe that the bailout, is not coming too late. We really need that money at this point in time.
Okay, let's now also talk about one of the burning issues that so many airlines have at the back of their mind and looking at cost-cutting measures. At this point in time, the cost of Jet A1 fuel still is quite a concern. At the end of the day, airlines are going to be flying suboptimally, and you still have to burn as much fuel as you ordinarily would. What's your take on having to look more in-depthly into this area, and then going back to the fact that we don't necessarily refine oil, so we still have to largely deal with that deficit?
Well, Jet A1 marketing or sales in Nigeria has been completely deregulated. So what that means is that government has no play in the pricing. The pricing is strictly affected by demand and supply forces. However, in order to counteract that, airlines need to go back to the drawing board, either by means of refleeting. It is evident that there is travel bias now. The load factors pre-COVID-19 are definitely not the load factors we're experiencing today. So the flights are sub-economic. That is a fact. We are now operating at sub-economic levels. But sub-economic on a 737 might not be sub-economic on a Dash 8-400. So airlines have to start rethinking their fleet modalities. Are we going to continue to operate with the 737s at sub-economic levels, or do we have to go back or go forward to compact right-sizing fleets? So this, in my opinion, has to be a key function of the airline business plan, especially at the time that we are looking to access the bailout fund from the government. These kind of processes or these kind of plans have to be put in place to guarantee that the airline can, even at least at operate at least at economic levels. We cannot continue to use the same modalities pre-COVID-19 for post-COVID-19 operations. The industry has to go back to the books.
Most definitely, the modalities cannot remain the same. This is the new norm, and we just have to rise up to the occasion and live beyond expectations. Thank you very much for your time on the show this week. Chukwuemeka Achum.
Thank you, David. Always a pleasure.
Well, this is where we wrap up this edition of Business Week. Many thanks for watching so far. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'm David Alabi.